to the What Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Tuesday, August 25th, 2015. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Danae is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Today, our third hour guest is Dr. David Duke, and he's going to be talking about all kinds of events, including the aftermath of his recent appearance on the Alex Jones show. So we've got that to look forward to as well. And before we get into the news here, I'm looking at the final numbers on the stock market, and it was kind of amazing to watch the corporate media all day long. The market is up, it's doing well, it's great. Forgetting it's still down over 1,000 from where it was about a month ago, and then just about an hour before the close, it went into a dive, and the Dow ended 204 down, NASDAQ down 19, S&P minus 25, and it closed on the down, which means it's got more to go. Hasn't settled yet. So we'll see what the Asian markets are doing, because we're not out of this yet. The Nikkei got hammered last night, minus 733 down. Okay, now getting over to the war zones, the United States is going to start deploying F-22 fighter jets to Europe, in response to Russia's intervention in Ukraine. They're still pushing this idea that this is all Russia's idea. It's bad Russians, we got to go to war against Russia. I'm back. Okay, fine. Boy, we are having all kinds of weird technical glitches here today, and I don't know what's going on. May have been out here it looks like maybe Roadrunner glitched us a little bit. Isn't it wonderful living in a third world fascist dictatorship where nothing is reliable and nothing works? Anyway, so I don't know where we lost our signal, whether it was the Dow taking a plunge at the closing bell or the F-22s going to Europe, and it's all the fault of Russia. Interesting article came out of DissonantVoice.org. Dear NATO, are you lying about Russia or simply incompetent? And it's in response to this so-called fact sheet NATO has put out, basically saying it's all Russia's fault. Russia did this. Russia is evil. Russia is bad. We've all got to hate the Russians. And, of course, we here in the West would never, ever do anything bad that we could be criticized for. So the propaganda war is still up there, and they're still trying to sell us a war with Russia. Now, Russia has started to engage in Syria. Remember, Vladimir Putin has turned America's propaganda against itself. The U.S. sent in their manufactured terror groups, Al-Qaeda and ISIS, into Syria to use as a proxy force against Assad, who they've been trying to get out for going on 4 years. And the U.S. and Israel are carrying out airstrikes, and they're saying, we're not bombing the Syrian people. We're not making war on Syria, but we have to go fight against ISIS. And then, of course, we find out the U.S. has actually been supplying ISIS, partly through this gun-running operation that was operating out of the consulate in Benghazi, Libya. And so now Russia is coming in and said, okay, we agree, ISIS and Al-Qaeda are terrible. We're going to help you fight them. So Russia's army is now in Syria going up against these proxy groups working covertly for the United States. And what's the U.S. going to say? Well, actually, we made ISIS and Al-Qaeda, so you're at war with us, and we can absolutely outmaneuvered the U.S. propaganda. And U.S. can't do a thing about it, not without starting to admit to the American people that the entire war on terror is a gigantic hoax that is a mask for wars of conquest, which is not something families are usually willing to sacrifice the lives of their children for. Now, getting on to the situation in Iran, it is beginning to look like, despite all the propaganda and the assurances this deal was over and done with, it's starting to slip. All of AIPAC's horses and all of AIPAC's men cannot put Netanyahu's agenda back together again. And we are seeing American rabbis sent a signed statement. They're in support of the Iran deal. 51 Christian faith leaders have now gone on record urging Congress to go for the deal. We've had a couple of people who were opposed to the Iran deal have now switched and come back over. And while Congress may have enough votes to pass this measure saying don't take part in the deal, they don't have a veto-proof majority. And remember, all Congress can do is take the U.S. out of the P5+1. The U.S. Congress has no authority to go to the other member nations that made this deal and say, you've got to call it off. You know, if we're not going to go along with it, you've got to call it off. Those are the nations, they're already in Iran. They're making deals, signing contracts, getting the business going again. And all Congress can do is isolate American businesses from those markets and resources. That's all they can do. But no price is too great to pay to please almighty Israel here. Now, there was a really weird story over at IsraelHayom.com bemoaning the fact that so many Senate Democrats are refusing to go along with Israel's demand of killing the Iran deal. And, you know, they're obviously being arm-twisted by Obama. And if you read this article, what it's really coming down to is a declaration by Israel, how dare those American congressmen listen to their own president instead of us? What's wrong with those people after all the money we gave them? And if there's anything good out of this whole Iran deal debacle, it's the American people are finally being forced to confront just how much Israel has subverted our federal government, how many of our politicians are in Israel's pocket, and perfectly willing to sell out this nation, send your children to be killed and crippled in wars that serve Israel's agenda. Now, there's a story that came out of governmentslaves.info with more confirmation, including pictures, that American military forces are protecting the opium fields in Afghanistan. Huge amount of money involved in that drug trade. Another story coming out of Blacklisted News about how British occupation forces are actually involved in harvesting and transporting the opium. And you need to remember, when the Taliban was in charge of Afghanistan, opium production was all but eradicated. And ever since the U.S. occupation, overthrow of their government, put in a puppet ruler, bumper crops. Huge amounts of opium flowing out of Afghanistan, coming to the streets of the United States of America, also the streets of Russia, which Russia is not happy about. And we've got the pictures. That's what the conquest of Afghanistan was about. An oil pipeline right of way, and while we're at it, let's set up a new opium production center, because Afghanistan used to be a major producer of opium before the Taliban came to power. How dare those people shut us off from our drugs that we're going to sell to our own people? You need to wake up and understand the biggest drug smuggler in the United States of America is the United States government itself. The war on drugs is really just a war on the competition's drugs. And that's what's really going on over there. That's what your kids are fighting and dying for in Afghanistan, opium. We'll be right back. I don't know what's going on. Could be that we're being attacked because of our third-hour guest. On the other hand, could be some of Hillary's people, because over the last couple of days I've fired a real broadside at the Broad, and they're not very happy with me at all. Okay, so getting on back to the news, an analyst for Jane's Defense has built a case that the recent explosion in Bangkok was connected to a terror organization called the Grey Wolves. But this so-called terror organization is one of the U.S. proxies, was created and has been run out of the U.S. Embassy in Ankara, Turkey. So it looks like this is another one of the many U.S. overthrows. We're going to kick out the government, put our own people in, and live happily ever after, except, of course, that nobody actually does. Now, over in Palmyra, the Baal Shemin temple has been blown up by ISIS, and they're making a big deal about, oh, those evil ISIS, they're going around and destroying all these monuments and all the, how could they? Of course, that's just like all these people running around the United States, tearing down Confederate memorials and monuments, desecrating Confederate graves. If you really think about it, they're behaving exactly the same way. Why is it okay for the people to desecrate Confederate graves, but ISIS is evil because they're breaking this other stuff. Kind of a little bit of a double standard. All right, so let's talk about the economy. As I mentioned before, it was kind of enjoyable watching the corporate media waxing episodic that the market was up today, and obviously the bad times, the dip of the last few days was over. The market was up. It was soaring by 200 points, and it was for most of the day. But even at that peak, it's still like 1,000 points down from where it was just a few weeks ago. But they're out there trying to sing happy days are here again. It's time to buy on in. And anybody who did in the middle of the day got hammered, because by the end of the day, the Dow was in minus 200 territory. Well down into the 15,000s. I'm sure we all remember when the market was high in the 17,000s, not all that long ago, and now it's down in the 15,000s. Closed on the downtrend, which means there's more to go. And as a matter of fact, over at Investment Watch blog, Jeffrey Gundlach is saying the U.S. equity markets face another major leg down. It hasn't hit the bottom. The bottom is way, way down below because all this market manipulation has resulted in an overvalued market. The price of a stock is supposed to be based on its earnings ability. You know, what dividends it pays. And there's supposed to be a balanced ratio between the price of a stock representing so many months of the earnings that stock will produce. When you're manipulating the market, all you're thinking about is what I'm buying it for today versus what I can sell it for tomorrow. That's called speculation. That's not the way the market was intended to operate. And every time the speculators get hold of it, chaos ensues. And we have a drastically overvalued stock market. The underlying value of those stocks does not support the prices they are trading at, because the prices have been driven up by flipping these stocks back and forth, back and forth. Our current stock market is more dangerously overvalued than it was in 1929. And when the real panic hits, and I don't think this is what happened yesterday. I don't think that's the big one. When the big one starts, everybody's going to bail. The people who are out first will get their money. And everybody else is going to be left with an impressive-looking number on the previous month's brokerage report, and that's all they're going to get. The money is not there for everybody to get out in an overvalued market. That's just the reality. Now, over in Greece, Tsipras is basically jumping ship. He got elected to be the captain on a promise that he would miss the iceberg, then ram the ship into the iceberg, and now he's going to say, well, guess I didn't work, I'm going to get out of here, and it's time for new elections. They're looking at snap elections now as Tsipras gets on out of there, and the question now is, was he a fraud from the beginning? Was he sent on in to get all the votes saying, I will save you from austerity, then plunge Greece even deeper into the debt slavery, and then say, sorry, tried my best, and he gets to retire someplace. Now, the net result of this, according to a story over in Wake Up From Your Slumber, is that Greece may still leave the euro. The parliament is starting to seriously talk about breaking off from Brussels, dropping the euro, returning to the drachma. Because if the money junkies at the IMF, the World Bank, the Fed won't recognize that much of Greece's debt is odious, at the same time they're writing off 20% of Ukraine's debt, then Greece really doesn't have any other option than to break off and say, we're our own country, we're not part of the European Union, this part of the debt was odious, we're not obligated to pay it, and we will make payments on the rest of it. And the principle of odious debt is recognized as valid under international law, that the people of a nation are not liable for debts created by their government for purposes other than the care of the nation itself. War debts are considered odious. Debts incurred to give money and bribes to other countries are considered odious. Debts incurred to place your people under surveillance are considered odious. And certainly, this set of currency swaps that Papandreou did with Goldman Sachs to try and hide the scale of Greece's debt while merging with the European Union, that has to count as odious debt. And so we're back to looking at a Grexit in the immediate future. Now, it's rather amazing when we talk about how Ukraine just got 20% of their debt written off by the money junkies, because Ukraine's gross domestic product has dropped by 35%. They're plunging faster than Zimbabwe right now. And that means that anybody holding any Ukraine debt, you're not likely to ever get that money back. And that's just the way that is here. So, let's talk about Hillary Clinton's emails, because the scandal is continuing to grow and more information is coming out. And one of the emails, basically Huma Abedin, who at the time was Clinton's deputy chief of staff at the State Department, forwarded a summary of a high-level September 29, 2009 meeting to Clinton, which talked about security issues at the Benghazi consulate. Now, these had been raised by Eric Boswell, who was a security official, who got the blame for what happened at Benghazi and was forced to resign. And yet here we have the evidence that this guy was trying to get the security improved at Benghazi and was being ignored. Now, for those of you who understand that the U.S. government is engaged in the business of overthrowing legitimately elected governments and replacing them with hired puppets, this is not going to come as a surprise. But it probably is a surprise to most of the American people, because more of the emails are showing that Hillary Clinton was in communication with members of the coup that removed Honduras elected President Manuel Zelaya from office. They're still playing these games. We're going to kick out the government that we don't like. We're going to force you to accept a government we do like, and all will be well. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. I'm looking at the corporate media, and they're trying to clean the egg off their face from earlier in the day when they were proclaiming the survival of this last dip, and it was up, and everything's going to be hunky-dory. And, of course, it didn't work out, and everybody's looking for somebody to blame. And apparently Pat Robertson has come out saying the reason the stock market is crashing is because of our support and tolerance of abortion. So he's got all the answers courtesy of his imaginary playmate in the cloud. Let's grab a couple of phone calls before we go back to the email scandal. Andrew in New York, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. I wanted to talk about Donald Trump.
Yes.
And it's kind of like a double standard with the media. Like, for example, Lindsey Graham said, like, was talking about Donald Trump and said, oh, he's going to beat his brains out, like, and the media didn't say nothing and they cheered, but, like, they always come after Donald Trump and he talks something like, for example, about, like, oh, he's being, like, offensive to women or something like that.
Well, you know what's really funny is, you know, the media has been pounding on Trump and attacking him. We all saw that shameful performance by Fox News on the first debate here. And now everybody's complaining, well, Donald Trump is just getting an unfair amount of media attention. And so they launched on him. They're beating him up. They're building sympathy and awareness for him. And now they're saying, well, he's got way too much media time. We've got to be fair and start ignoring him from here on out. So it's pathetic with a capital Path.
One thing about Donald Trump, like, even though I don't agree with everything on him, but I think he needs somebody to, like, explain what goes on inside. Like, he doesn't recognize there's a conspiracy in our government.
I agree. Or he doesn't understand that we all understand that's what's going on. I tend to think, being an outsider, which is his attraction, he doesn't really know all that's been going on, and he does need a good political analyst to tell him, or it's going to be way too easy to lure him into some kind of a trap by his opponents on the upcoming debates. And he needs somebody.
That's what happened with, like, Ronald Reagan. Like, he was a sincere person, but, like, do you remember about, like, Hinckley? Like, they supposedly that tried to kill him. But, like, I think, like, they did that because, like, he wasn't, like, following, like, what the conspiracy wanted him to do. And after the assassination attempt, like, he was complicit and, like, followed what they told him.
I think the attempt on Reagan's life was that George Bush had run out of patience getting that Oval Office. And I think he was trying for a promotion. Remember, the Hinckley family and the Bush family were very close friends. And, so, yeah, there's a connection there that nobody ever looked at. Okay, it looks like our BAM user is also acting up. We seem to be under some kind of a hack attack that's trying to disrupt our streams here. And like I said, it could be because of our third hour guest, and it could be Hillary's people, because I fired a major broadside at the Broad not too long ago, and they're getting very, very upset. So my apology to those of you on BAM user, and go to GCN and listen to the archive after the show is over. All right, Andrew, thank you very much for the phone call. I'm going to let you go, and we're going to switch over to Mo in Florida. And Mo, what's on your mind?
Thanks for the forum, Michael, and they cannot stop us. We'll use a Dixie cups and string if we have to.
Yep. Smoke signals, semaphore flags, Aldous lamps.
I just wanted to mention I remember, you can still see it on YouTube, which surprises me. In 2010, I remember watching the news and with my wife, and we were just stunned watching Geraldo Rivera there interviewing one of the Marines guarding the opium plant, the opium fields, and he was beside himself trying to find some kind of, and he finally came up with the idea, well, if we don't do it, then we got to somehow train them into going other things, but they need the money. If we don't get the money, they don't get the money from the opium, they'll need money for something, and they'll do something great. And you can still see this. You can still see it on YouTube. When you mentioned it,
what's absurd? You know what's absurd? What were these people growing when the Taliban was in charge of the place? Because opium was outlawed. They caught you with a poppy, they'd take your hand off. So this idea that they didn't have anything else they knew how to grow was nonsense. What were they growing before? And all of that opium is, it's coming here to the streets of America, and it's being sold into our inner cities. And this is how the CIA funds operations that Congress is not being told about.
Yeah, one other comment, if I can, on David Duke. I did listen to his interview, his discussion with Alex Jones, and I thought Alex was pretty fair with him. He gave him a lot of time, but I think he somewhat belittled him. And I never listened to David Duke much because I always thought he was kind of a racist in a way. And you stop and think about it, you can be just as proud as being white as you can black or green or yellow. And I'm not a David Duke fan, but I'm looking forward to this interview, and I hope they don't cut you off. But thanks a lot, Michael.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, and we are going to be talking to David in the third hour. It's bad to be racist just for the sake of being racist, but all too often we will find a group of individuals are behaving very, very badly, and then they'll say your opposition to their behavior represents racism. And that is an absolute fraud, and that's a big part of what David was trying to get across there on that one. All right, one more phone call before the commercial break. Peter in Los Angeles, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, I thought I'd just give you a little ammunition before you went into your Hillary Clinton little time here. And I just wanted to recall for everybody that Bill Clinton sold pardons. Remember Mark Rich, the fugitive billionaire financier and a Mossad agent, sold him a pardon for a couple $1 million for the Clinton Library. Of course, he sold the Lincoln bedrooms. Of course, he sold burial plots in Arlington National Cemetery. He sold seats on Commerce Department. You couldn't get represented in the Clinton White House if you were a business unless you paid money, and that way you got on the Commerce Department and you got their backing.
Don't forget that. Don't forget that big stink about how Bill Clinton pardoned these Puerto Rican terrorists who'd been committing bombs. Oh, yeah. Because Hillary needed the Puerto Rican vote to win her Senate seat.
Yeah, that's right. And here's another little insight that I know you've arrived at, but I just want to say it plainly. The Clintons, clearly, there is no international business policy under the Clintons. It's who you pay, and that's who they represent. Their foreign policy is whoever pays Hillary Clinton gets what they want. It's whatever the Clintons can make money from and be corrupt on. That's what their policy is. They're out to make money on everything.
Well, then it goes beyond that. It goes beyond that to a demonstrated history of the Clintons just acting as if they think the entire United States and all of its assets and all of its secrets are their personal property to do with as they please, and most assuredly that is not the case. That's not what the Constitution says. Everything that Hillary Clinton was offering for sale, or Bill Clinton was offering for sale, was technically the property of the American people, and there are supposed to be rules that say, no, you don't give away these top-secret missile technologies to China just because they're helping to fund Bill Clinton's 1996 election campaign.
Mike, they've never had a job in their life, and they've never made anything to sell or done anything to sell.
Oh, no. That's not accurate. That's not accurate. Hillary Clinton had a job. She was working for the Watergate investigation. She got fired for lying. But, yes, I think we could count that as a real job.
But what they do come on for sale is everything that they can get their hands on that's not theirs.
Yes, absolutely. They are the duo of deception and the couple of crime. We need to do a superhero graphic about them. Or supervillain, comic book supervillains, the Clintons.
That really would be a funny one. You could really do a lot with it.
Well, we certainly could. I'm going to have to let you go here. We've got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, back when Bill Clinton, Mr. Hillary, was president, the head of the CIA and for a time the NSA was General Michael Hayden. And he has come out saying that Hillary Clinton is in serious, serious trouble, going way beyond merely losing the nomination for president, which is starting to look more and more like a foregone conclusion. Yes, 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 yes. And he's absolutely right. And the reason I wrote that article the other day, the scandals behind the scandal, is the server itself is just the tip of the iceberg. Now, Hillary is still thrashing around trying to find an excuse. Oh, it's all the fault of the security regulations. I didn't feel those documents should be classified. They weren't marked as classified when I got them. And some of Hillary's staunchest supporters are starting to desert her. Over on MSNBC, the Morning Joe show, they were firmly in the Hillary camp. And now they're saying, there's a there. And Hillary's public appearances are starting to work against her. The Washington Free Beacon describes her press conferences on this as condescending and dismissive. She's trying to act like this is just nothing. You're impolite to even mention it to me. And, okay, there was a strange noise behind me. So even the corporate media is starting to distance themselves. We're already hearing from some of Hillary's top donors that if Biden steps in, they're going to change their support to him. Now, the Pentagon right now is remaining silent on whether their top secret data was compromised on Hillary's email server. But polls are now showing 46% of Democrats think Hillary should suspend, if not cancel, her campaign. It's all coming apart. Now then, in the good old days, if you were a spy, life was hard. You had to actually sneak into places and steal classified files and then somehow sneak them out of where you took them from. You'd have to leave marks on public places like mailboxes to signal a meeting, and you'd have to either meet with your controller in person, which is very risky, or you'd have to drop the documents someplace, like tape them to the bottom of a bridge, which is what Robert Hansen did. But thank goodness for modern technology, because to be a top-level spy today, all you need is a private email server with weak security and no encryption, from which foreign contacts can hack on in and copy off whatever classified government files they want. And then you have a charitable foundation which collects and launders the payments from these foreign interests, and you're all set. I think that's the real scandal behind the scandal of the email server. We already know the Clintons were selling high-technology secrets to China in exchange for campaign donations for Clinton's 1996 bid for re-election. So there's a track record here to look at. This is the highest level spy in American history, a Secretary of State, selling out our nation's secrets for a fast buck, for a donation to the foundation. I think that's the big scandal, along with the fact that the U.S. government was using that consulate in Benghazi to smuggle guns from Libya to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria, at a time when we were all told ISIS and Al-Qaeda are our enemies in the war on terror. And that fits the legal definition of an act of treason. Aid and comfort to enemy in time of war. Now, if Hillary was obeying Obama's orders, and I think more than likely she was, then the big scandal behind that is the entire war on terror is a fraud, a mask over naked U.S. aggression and conquest against nations that have not done any wrong to us. That's the big scandal. I think they're going to try and dump Hillary and keep it to a limited hangout about the server and those questions, because they don't want you thinking about how we might have actually had a Secretary of State who betrayed this country. That delegitimizes the government. Figuring out that the entire war on terror, in which so many of our children have been killed and crippled, was a fraud and a hoax. That these wars were all about conquering oil nations and resources and forcing the world to go on using the dollar for global trade and bankruptcy. That's not going to sit well with the American people. 300 million Americans realizing the scale to which they have been lied to. The federal government would never survive that. And I think we're going to see a major push to get Hillary out in the coming months. The big question is, will Hillary go quietly? I hope not. I hope this gets as big and stinky and smelly as it possibly can, because it's time for the American people to really comprehend the true nature of our political class in Washington, D.C. We're overdue. We're definitely overdue. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is filling up stadiums. Jeb Bush apparently is having trouble filling up banquet halls. Remember that video we had of Hillary at the bicycle shop talking about some talking point, and it turns out there was nobody there but Hillary and the camera crew. Couldn't get anybody to show up. I certainly wouldn't. I'd go to a Donald Trump event. There isn't anybody else out there I'd want to be in the same room with. Meanwhile, the Pentagon door is revolving again because 4-star General Ray Odierno retired from his position as U.S. Army Chief of Staff last Friday. Figured, he's going to relax. Nope. He's just gotten a brand new job as a senior advisor to J.P. Morgan Chase. And I'll bet you J.P. Morgan Chase is going to be making heavy investments into war and weapons and all the things required for bloody global conflict. Now, Lockheed got caught using federal funds to lobby for more federal funds. That's actually against the law. And the lobbying got them a $7.7 billion contract. And they had to pay a fine for using federal funds to lobby for more federal funds, and they paid a whopping $4.79 million against the $7.7 billion, with a B, they made. Not too shabby a deal. And that's how all these corporations operate. They'll commit a crime, make huge amounts of money, they pay a few percentage of it as some kind of a settlement or fine, and that's just how the business gets done. Now, as you know, the war in Iraq was sold to us with lies about nuclear weapons of mass destruction, which were never found, about lies about germs, which were never found, lies about chemical weapons, which were never found, other than the ones the U.S. had left there. Well, while the U.S. government are basically cowards who don't want to look in the mirror, The British government has been trying to conduct an honest inquiry into just how it is that the administration of Tony Blair got sucked into what was obviously a gigantic fraud. It's called the Chilcot Inquiry. And Britain has been requesting certain documents from the U.S. government as part of their inquiry, and the White House continues to move to block them. None of your business, you may not have them. And the British press is starting to make a big stink over the fact that the United States is basically blocking this crucial data and acting like they have something to hide. Meanwhile, over at the State Department, the spokesdrone was asked about this refusal to declassify the documents for the inquiry, and the spokesman said, Chilcot what? Doesn't even know what's going on. I'm just here to read the cue cards and look handsome or beautiful, as the case may be. All right, we're coming up here on our top of the hour news break. When we come on back, some interesting, bizarre developments in the world of 9/11 conspiracy theories. What's going on in Gaza, global warming. We'll be talking about that. And, of course, in our third hour, Dr. David Duke. And we'll be back after the news. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. And I'm just looking on TV. The big announcement here is that Obama has given Vice President Biden Obama's blessing to run for president. And this is basically pro forma, because the vice president is supposed to be doing his vice presidential duties, and Obama's basically saying, yes, you can take time off to go ahead and run for the office. And that is another indicator Biden is about to step in. And that will be the end of Hillary 2016, unless some people start getting really depressed and wind up in suburban Washington, D.C. parks with bullets in their bodies, or have terrible accidents with small planes, which seems to happen to a lot of the Clinton people. Somebody wrote in to remind me, and this is mentioned briefly in my article, The Epic of Clinton's Mess. When the Clintons left the White House, they tried to steal a whole bunch of the furniture. We're not talking about furniture they themselves brought up from Little Rock. We're talking about the White House furniture that is technically the property of the people of the United States of America. And they took it. They were forced to give it back. It was a big stink during the transition. That's the kind of people they are. It's the kind of people that run for these positions of power. When we make political office too attractive, too much money, too much power, it attracts the wrong sort of people. The Founding Fathers knew that. And they envisioned a small, limited, central government that was a temporary honor for people who made their living elsewhere. It was a part-time job at best. All right, we're going to grab a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Dustin, are you there?
Hello, Mike.
There you are.
Hey, Mike. Yeah, remember yesterday I was talking about how they keep mentioning correction territory. We're incorrect. How about this? The fundamentals are sound.
They were saying that all morning long when the market was up. See, it shows our fundamentals. We're in a recovery. This proves we're in a recovery. And then the last hour, whoop, right off the end. And, oh, it's China's fault. It's all China's fault. Really, it's, So.
Yeah, that's the new thing. When something goes wrong, we got to blame somebody else. It's all China's fault.
Oh, there's nothing new in that. Our government's always done that. Politicians will take credit for everything good that happens, even if they had nothing to do with it. And then they will drop the blame for everything bad that happens on the opposition party, or it's the will of the imaginary playmate in the sky. That's how they operate. It's how they've always operated.
Yeah, where was China in 1929? Where was China in 1987? Where was China in 2007, 2008? People got to be pretty stupid if they believe that one.
Well, again, the ultimate blame for all of this rests on that 11th marble I have been telling you about. And it is rather interesting when I came out with that article, this, highly regarded economist wrote a very lengthy article about why this was complete and utter nonsense, this 11th marble thing. And when you read it and distilled it down, it basically said, well, we'll just create that 11th marble. And what he left unsaid is that means the money junkies think there's now a 12th marble in that can. It is an inherently unstable system, and it leads to crashes, and the crashes become the root causes of major wars. And that's it.
Where you keep, yep. It's a debt problem. People don't understand. It's a debt problem. You can't pay your Visa bill with using another Visa card because eventually you'll pile up Visa card bills.
Before the creation of the Federal Reserve, there was no such thing as a world war, and now we're into big mistake number 3. Dustin, I got to let you go. Thank you very much for the phone call. I want to get back onto this very bizarre story that came out of scoopfeed.net. Professor Qasim Qassam has been awarded £250,000 by the Arts and Humanities Research Council to study what he calls vice epistemology, or why people don't believe the official story of 9/11. What is it about this idea that it was a hoax and an inside job that's so attractive that so many otherwise normal, mentally sane people would just hop on board? And so what we basically have here is another corrupted scientist gets another huge grant to come out and claim that anyone who doubts the official U.S. government story of 9/11 is some kind of mentally defective kook who should not be tolerated by polite society. And, of course, this scientist will ignore the actual facts, such as the visible signs of demolition charges on the wreckage of the towers, the traces of thermite, Bush being allowed to sit reading about goats by his Secret Service protective detail, the dancing Israelis, the obvious collapse of Building 7 into its own footprint with the sounds of the explosions caught on tape, and how BBC, Fox, and CNN all reported that Building 7 had collapsed almost half an hour before it actually happened. This scientist is being paid to sell an idea and wrap it in his white laboratory coat so that you will believe it without question, because after all, this is a scientist, and scientists wouldn't lie to us. In an earlier age, it would be priest. The priest would never lie to you, and so you will believe what you're told to believe. And they're just using scientists the same way now. You know, with enough money, you can find scientists who'll say things like, sugar's got nothing to do with obesity. Turned out they were paid by Coca-Cola. We all know how Al Gore handed out all kinds of money to scientists to prove that humans were warming the earth, to sell us carbon credits and carbon tax. And this is just more of the same. Oh, anybody who doubts the official story, they're mentally ill. We have to take care of them. We have to take away their guns. We have to take away their right to freedom of speech. We can't have them spreading these crazy ideas. All right, over in Israel, the Gaza hospitals are on the verge of imminent shutdown because of the Israeli blockade. Medical supplies are not getting through. There's been virtually no reconstruction since the last Israeli attack on Gaza, because Israel will not allow construction materials through. It's basically, Israel has turned Gaza into a giant gulag, and that's exactly what's going on. And the whole world understands that's what Israel is doing. It's a gulag. Now, there's an interesting story coming out of Press TV. About a week ago, we were talking how there was a group of black activists who were taking a very public support position for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. And basically they said, we understand what the Palestinians are dealing with at the hands of the IDF because we're dealing with exactly the same thing at the hands of the American police. And this Press TV article basically says, yes, the American police are being sent to be trained by Israelis who are teaching the American police to treat the American people the way the IDF treats the Palestinians. Brutalization, oppression, repression. It's got nothing to do with law enforcement or fighting or punishing crime. It has everything to do with a police state crushing the people down. And they're absolutely right, except that we know the police brutality in the United States is not focused on just the black population. In fact, there was a study done that shows actually more white people are being wrongfully killed by the police, but the media doesn't cover it because they're trying to spin it, that it's a race issue for political gain going into next year's elections. The American police have, since 9/11, have killed 8 times as many innocent Americans as the terrorists did, and that includes those who died on 9/11. Now then, Up in Canada, there's been a development in the new Democratic Party. They're coming up on their elections in just a little while. Everybody's hoping Harper is going to be given a pink slip. We don't know because they've adopted all those electronic voting machines. But apparently the new Democratic Party is starting to kick out their candidates who are supporting Palestine and opposed to Israel's blockade. So the Canadian voters are going to get their choice of which Israeli puppet gets the nice office for the next term. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm looking at the Fox News feed, and they're still going on about this thwarted attack on the train that was stopped by some Americans. And good that they did that. Good that they're making heroes out of these guys. But it is beginning to look like it was another one of these staged false flag terror attacks that got botched, went horribly wrong. And the reason I'm saying that is because the TSA has announced that they're going to start doing airport-type inspections of train passengers. And the goal is that if you're going on an airplane or a train or even a bus, you will get your crotch groped and your skin cancerized because, you know, it's a booming industry. You know, Michael Chertoff is out there just laughing his head off at all the money he's making off of this through the Chertoff Group. And again, it shows that our government policy is very uncoordinated because we're in the middle of this push to encourage us all to give up our individual cars and start using public mass transportation to save the earth from human-caused global warming. And then the TSA comes out and says, yeah, use public transportation. We get to grab you and poke you and steal things from you. So they're working at cross purposes on that one. But they're out there saying, you know, yes, we've got to put up security on the trains here. No, if you want to stop terrorism, there's a very simple way. Stop messing around with other people's countries. That'll get rid of the real terrorists. Of course, the fake ones who are hired to convince you there's a terror threat, they're going to keep on going until they get fired by their employers, like Adam Perlman and Joseph Cohen and all these other phonies running around with towels they stole from Holiday Inn wrapped around their head saying, I'm a Muslim terrorist, be afraid of me, you schmucks. Alrighty, speaking of trains, apparently wave of desperate migrants board trains toward the European Union as Hungary builds razor wire fence to keep them out. There is a flood of Syrians, Iraqis, and Afghans who are trying to get out of the way of all of these U.S.-sponsored wars. They're fleeing to Europe. And right now, we have the largest human refugee crisis since World War II. Another indicator that we are in World War III, even though nobody really wants to officially admit it. And when you think of all the death and destruction and sorrow and suffering that is caused by these wars over which brand of ink and paper we're all supposed to use for the next 100 years, after a while you begin to realize how silly it all is. Because it is just ink and paper. And the belief that this ink and paper is somehow more trustworthy than that other ink and paper. Now, Europe, which adopted initially the same open borders policy that the U.S. did, is now regretting it. They've got a huge immigrant problem, actually worse than what we're dealing with here in the United States of America. And there's an article that came out of the Telegraph saying that Europe risks becoming the rescue boat that sinks beneath the weight of those clinging to it. They can't absorb that population. They can't provide for them. The economy will not produce jobs for them. It's huge, huge human displacement. Now, earlier I drew a parallel between those people who are trying to ban the Confederate flag, tear down Confederate memorials and monuments. They're talking about taking 2 of the 4 faces off of Mount Rushmore, completely erasing that Stone Mountain sculpture. We've got to get rid of all of that. And basically they're doing exactly the same thing we're told ISIS is doing when it is defacing important monuments and memorials across the Mideast. But for some reason ISIS is able to do it, and the progressives are okay to do it to us, to erase our past history and our culture. Now, to show you how ridiculous this is getting, okay, this is a story that appeared in prisonplanet.com. Over in Tennessee, there's a school district that in order to not offend anybody at all, they're banning all flags. The Confederate flag, the Gadsden flag, and yes, the flag of the United States of America. That's how silly this has become. And it's a reminder. The goal of all this banning of symbols is to erase our sense of a national identity. So they can step in and say, well, forget about all those old flags. We have a brand new, totally unoffensive flag everybody will love. It's a blue field with the planet Earth with a $sign stamped on it. You will love and obey this flag because it is the flag of the New World Order. But when you reach the point where you're so afraid of offending somebody that you're going to ban the stars and stripes, that's really ridiculous. That's up there on a par with all these schools that prohibited the wearing of U.S. flag shirts on Cinco de Mayo because it might upset the illegal immigrant children. Now, over at Facebook, somebody noticed that articles that were being posted about illegal immigrants taking jobs away from legal American citizens weren't showing up. Is Facebook engaging in propagandistic censorship of their members' posts? Well, apparently they were, but Facebook says it was an error. Just some kind of a random computer glitch that was banning these reports specifically about illegals taking jobs away from legal American citizens. We don't know how that got into the filters. It was just an accident. Really, it was just an accident. Another reason to maybe not be friends with Facebook. And yes, I use Facebook to put out stories and promote WhatReallyHappened.com, but anybody putting any of their personal data anywhere on the net today, you're wide open. The hackers are going to steal it. They're going to use it against you, and the NSA isn't going to try and stop them. The U.S. government isn't going to try and stop them because computer security software is a major industry, and the more we let the hackers wreck your computers in your home, it'll stimulate the economy because you'll buy more security software. Maybe you'll even be forced to buy a new computer. That's how I actually got my Vista machine. Somebody bought it, couldn't get it to work, got hit with malware, said, I give up, bought a new machine, gave me that one. I've been using it for audio recording and nothing else. So let's talk a little bit about the Ashley Madison story. And unfortunately, we are starting to get reports that some of the people whose names were exposed by the hack on the Ashley Madison subscribers have committed suicide. I haven't got a confirmation or any specific names, but there's rumbles around that may be happening. Now, Ashley Madison has issued a $375,000 bounty for the identity of the hackers. It's a lot of money. And I hope the hackers get turned in. Because I think we're at the stage right now where I'd like to see some of these hackers, well, you remember what they did to Damian for trying to assassinate the French king? That sort of thing. I'd like to see the hackers have to go through that. We'll be back with more about Ashley Madison after these few words. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. So we're talking about this Ashley Madison hack of this website. And so I have to wonder about the gullibility of some people. First of all, before the hacking attack happened, Ashley Madison was being sued for fraud. And for those of you who are not aware of what I'm talking about, this was a website set up for married people who wanted to have affairs. In fact, that was their slogan. Life is short, have an affair. You'd sign on to this, and you would be, it was sort of like a dating site for cheaters. And they had quite a few people sign up. And as it turns out, they had very few real female members. Most of those profiles were fakes, just generated fakes. Oh, yes, I'd love to, but I'm going to be busy rotating my tires next week. And they got sued for the fraud. Now, adding to that, of course, is this fact that their databases got hacked and were made public. And a lot of names and addresses were put out there. of top CEOs in business, government officials who were logging into this cheating website using their government email address. How stupid can you be? Have these guys never heard about a honey trap? And to be very honest, it looks to me like that is possibly what this was. Set up a website to say, we're going to fix you up to cheat on your wife, and then you sign on up. Aha, we got you. You're planning on cheating on your wife. Shift some business our way, or shift the policy our way, or we'll tell your wife what's going on. So in a larger context, the fact that all this data has been outed is actually a good thing, because these people can't be blackmailed anymore. Their lives are ruined, but they did it to themselves. And how dumb do you have to be to fall for something like that? I mean, honestly. Well, in terms of the hack attack, sauce for the goose and so on, apparently it has now come out that Ashley Madison was trying to hack their rival websites. I didn't even realize this was such a growing business, setting up trysts for married people. And they were trying to hack into other people's sites in order to acquire lists of emails of potential customers. You don't want to be on that cheating website. Look how easy it was for us to get your name, and you want to come on over to us because we have better security than Hillary's email server, which actually turns out to be true. But they still got hacked anyway. Just got to shake your heads. Of course, that's a very light-hearted look at computer fraud, and given that we're going into election season, it is time to renew our focus on all these computer systems used for the election, because they are wide open to fraud. And the reality is, we don't know who actually won the popular vote for the last several elections, ever since these electronic machines came in. I mean, vote fraud is as old as elections themselves. In fact, there's a book that was written by the Collier brothers called Vote Scam from back in the Clinton years about the massive election fraud taking place back then. And that was back in the days of mechanical machines, before rapid scan and, dangling chads and all the rest of that. Sounds like a gay porn star, doesn't it? Dangling Chad. But it's a major, major problem. And it's illustrated by the fact that one of the first companies that was into making electronic voting machines was the Diebold Company. And Diebold got in there because they had a reputation, well earned, of building automated teller machines that never lost a penny from one end of the country to the other. And they had checks and balances, a paper audit trail. Nothing was left to chance. When you'd use one of those machines, you'd hear inside the little chattering as the printer made a permanent record of what you'd done. But the voting machine made by Diebold had none of that. No hard copy, no printing. And all of these machines making these, all these companies making these machines have maintained that the software in them is proprietary and cannot be allowed to be examined by the public. Really? What's all that difficult about if this button is pressed, tally one to that register? Now, Bev Harris, because of somebody's dumb mistake on one of these companies that made the GEMS election software, was able to actually get the source code and discover that there were 12 different ways built into the system to alter the outcome of an election and leave no trace behind. HBO Documentaries did a documentary called Hacking Democracy. I'm sure it's still out there on Netflix, and if you have not seen it, you have to see it. Now, my position on election fraud is very simple. If a government cannot prove the accuracy, honesty, and fairness of the elections by which they claim authority over we the people, then we the people are neither legally nor morally obligated to obey that government's dictates, to pay its bills, and certainly not to sacrifice the lives of our children in that government's wars of conquest. The only way Hillary Clinton is going to be able to stay in this race at this point is through massive election fraud. And there are indications that happened back in 2008. Going into the New Hampshire primary, Hillary was trailing Barack Obama's poll numbers. And everybody said if she doesn't win New Hampshire, she's out of the race. And voting was coming in, she was trailing badly, and then somehow in the middle of the night, magically, Hillary surged into the lead. Now, in any other country, when the exit polls don't match the official results, they scream, oh, it must be vote fraud. When Hillary's results in New Hampshire in 2008 didn't match the exit polls, the corporate media told us that, oh, the voters must have been lying to the exit pollsters because they didn't want to be seen as racist by not voting for Barack Obama. Well, if you're a voter leaving an election place and you meet an exit pollster, you don't know who they are. They're a total stranger. Why would you care? It was a nonsense excuse. But vote fraud is a reality in the United States, and we need to be aware of it. Look how blatant they were stealing the referendum for Scottish independence. It's almost gotten to the point where the government says, yeah, we're rigging the elections, just like we rigged the stock market. What are you going to do about it, huh? Just push the red button, go home happy, and we'll tell you who won, and you're not allowed to complain about anything we do to you because, after all, this is the government you voted for. Honest, really, this is what you wanted. But we are talking about the theft of democracy, the theft of our republic. And at some point, we need to get rid of those electronic black box election machines and go back to something verifiable. Because otherwise, we're never going to have a government that's really of the people, by the people, and for the people. They simply don't care anymore. It's not an election among the people. It's simply a contest between whose vote riggers are better than the other guy's vote riggers. That's a terrible way to run a country. Terrible way. Our democracy has been stolen in these electronic machines. We got to take it back any way that we can. Some voting districts are starting to decertify the machines. When the rigging gets too obvious, you press candidate A and candidate B's thing lights up. Yeah, we got to decertify. Oh no, it's just a simple mistake, honest. All right, going to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hello, hi America. Welcome back to the show here. And there's an interesting story here as we talk about the completely out of control computer crime taking place in our midst. There's a story over at TheVerge.com. Advertising malware rates have tripled in the last year. And that's because most of the malware is not coming from some kid in his parents' basement with a JavaScript generator just to play around. Computer crime has become big business. It's become organized computer crime. And a lot of the criminals will set up a legitimate business front claiming to have a product to sell. They'll go out to websites and place ads. We got burned at WhatReallyHappened.com many years ago with somebody who insisted that we accept a flash ad. And for a while we had a policy where we would accept flash ads only if we got the original file to compile the action script, because it's in the action script that nasties get done. But we made an exception this one time. They were offering us a lot of money. Never again. Was planting malware on visitors to our site. You probably noticed since the failed attempt to migrate our site to Drupal 7, we experimented with some new advertisers, and I had to let them all go. I had to fire them, which is unfortunately really severely impacted our operating funding. I was hoping to, basically get these new advertisers in and not have to beg for donations so much. But all three of them were carrying out what I thought very abusive advertising tactics. Grabbing the focus of your browser and dragging it so you had to look at their video, playing sounds, completely taking over the screen. And even though I didn't catch them planting malware, these kind of abusive behaviors I really couldn't tolerate, so we had to let them go. And it's rather interesting, the malware fronts aside, and apparently Yahoo has been burned again by what they thought was a trusted advertiser. These advertisers are putting up things to attract attention and get clicks and hits because that's what they use to go on out and get clients. And it's not going to last very long because the clients are going to realize a huge number of hits that isn't generating any sales is a losing proposition. And it's rather amazing. I spent a lot of years working in advertising, creating, producing, even directing TV commercials. And you have to really understand the psychology of your audience. If you force yourself on them, if you annoy them, they're going to turn off from whatever it is you are trying to sell. And getting those sales is really the ultimate goal of advertising. Just going on out and shoving things at people to generate hits and clicks is counterproductive. And it's rather amazing to see the online advertising community repeating all of the really horrible mistakes that we saw during the early days of television advertising. But I guess they're going to have to go through a learning process that you have to form a relationship with your audience. You have to entice their curiosity and lure them in, get them interested. And the ads that we generate for our banner clients, I think, are a good illustration of how you can do that, of engaging their curiosity and leading them in, asking them a question and then saying, our product is your answer. But some of these other big, large advertising concerns, their goal seems to be to generate huge numbers of clicks. They don't care how. And in the long run, they're going to collapse because their clients are going to say, yes, I'm getting lots of hits. I'm not getting any sales. And I don't understand why. Well, it's because they're ticking them off. Now, as you know, Windows 10 is not doing very well. It's not selling very well, or they can't even give it away is what it comes down to. And now there's a story that has come out of HackSpec about how two recent updates to Windows 7 and Windows 8 are back propagating the spy technology from Windows 10 onto your machine. And this is the practice where everything you're doing is going up to Microsoft Server. There's no way to turn it off. If they see something you're doing they think might be illegal, they're going to rat you out to the police and the FBI. Now, I've mentioned before, Windows 7 is so secure, even I can't use it. And as it turns out, I went and I looked through the update logs for these two patches, and neither one of them was able to install. So I kind of lucked out on that particular one. Windows 10 is so bad. How bad is it, Mike? They're talking about banning it outright in Switzerland because of its abuse on people's privacy. And after all the U.S. NSA spy scandal, why anybody, anywhere in the world, would buy Microsoft or Apple products at this point boggles the imagination, even for people who have nothing whatsoever to hide. We all value our privacy. And if I'm, I always joke with the supermarket, do you have the discount card? No, I don't. It's none of the FBI's business. I'm buying jelly donuts. That's the end of it right there. But we live in a world in which computers we have bought and paid for are being used against us. Barbarians inside the gates. And we all got to start moving to Linux. We got to get off these corporate-sponsored, government-controlled operating systems. They're wide open to the cyber criminals. They're locked against us. But the cyber criminals get in through the back doors the NSA put in. It really is very ridiculous. Up in Canada, they're starting their big push for mandatory vaccinations. You will let us stick a needle in your arm. You don't need to know what's in it. Just trust us. It serves the greater good. By the way, we have been talking about how propagandists like to dump all kinds of nonsensical crap all over the independent media, trying to make us look silly and kooky so that people will go back to being dependent on the corporate media and the government. Hasn't been working so far. The numbers are still trending away from corporate media and toward the independent media. One of the big ones they put out on the net all summer long was there's an asteroid coming to kill us all in September, and it was all over the place except my website, to the point where finally NASA had to issue a press statement saying there is no asteroid coming in to strike the Earth in September. And another piece of planted propaganda to kookify the net goes down in flames. Now, we all know the Nestle company, the company where the CEO said that nobody has a right to water, that it should be commoditized, and they're sucking it out from the aquifers of California, putting it in a bottle, and then selling it back to the people of California at a huge markup. The government of India is now suing Nestle for $99 million because apparently Nestle's instant noodle product being sold in India was found to be contaminated with lead. It's just out of control. And I'm sure the FDA will come out with an announcement saying, well, we've decided we're going to raise the maximum safe level exposure for lead to just above what we're finding in the Nestle's noodles, because that's what they do. Those safe levels are not about safety. They're about authorizing certain products for sale in the markets and saying we have to ban these others. Now, here in Hawaii, there is a growing focus on these birth defects out on Kauai. And there is a link that seems to exist to the growing presence of GM crops. And there's a doctor, pediatrician Carla Nelson, who has said that she's encountering way too many of these birth defects. And it's a spike. There's something going on. And she thinks it's because of exposure to glyphosate and the GMO crops. And that, too, is fascism. When the government and corporations are selling products and they don't care if it hurts you or not because, hey, you'll go to the doctor and spend more money there. Which all breaks down, of course, when we don't have any more money to go to the doctor to be cured of whatever it is what we bought from the supermarket gave us. Another story coming out of Newsmax, global warming is a $22 billion scam. Do you know the U.S. government spends twice as much to fight non-existent human-caused global warming than it does to secure the borders against the illegal immigrant flood? Something to think about. We got to take a break for the news. We'll be back with Dr. David Duke after these few words. Hello, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. We're having difficulty connecting with Dr. David Duke. Now, he did indicate that he was on a very tight schedule, and he may be a few minutes late, so we're just going to vamp till Q and get him on the air here. I'm looking at Fox News, and they had this State Department spokesman out there going full tear on a China bash. Oh, they're massive cyber attacks. They're persecuting Christians. They're tearing tags off of couch cushions. And, you know, they dress funny and they don't even know how to speak English, which is not true, actually. Most Chinese speak better English than most Americans at this point. But they're out there trying to just rally Americans to hate China and hate Russia and pay no attention to what's been going on Wall Street in Washington, D.C. And by the way, did you get that comment on the SRN news break? You know, they're already going out to the 401k account holders and say, don't pull your stocks, don't sell this, really just ride it out. It's going to be fine. And if I had a 401k, which I don't, I would have it all in physical metal. And of course they're going to say, don't sell your stocks. They're trying to prevent a huge crash, even if it costs you money, because your fortune, your wealth, your retirement is irrelevant to the issue of keeping this Ponzi scheme banking system and its overvalued, propped-up stock market looking good for just a little while longer. That's why they've been manipulating the price of physical metals down, silver and gold. Want to keep you in the equities markets, want to keep you in the savings accounts, in the bank. If everybody were to close their stock portfolios and empty their savings account, that would be the end of it. Okay, joining us on the air now is Dr. David Duke. And Dr. Duke, I'm so glad to have you back on the show. And I am not hearing anything. Okay, I'm still not hearing Dr. Duke. I think we have a volume slider in the wrong location. Welcome to professional radio production here. I still cannot hear him. And, okay. I know we've got him on the connection, but for some reason I am not able to hear him. And I'm just going to keep talking until they figure out what's going on in the control room. Turning to space news. Let's see. Let me, just in case they're not paying attention to the feed here. Turning to space news, as you know, Curiosity is still rolling all over Mars. It's doing a wonderful job. And they found what they're calling a wet patch. In other words, they're finally beginning to acknowledge that it's more than just Mars had water sometime in the distant past. It still has it now. And everyone's saying, how could it possibly have liquid water at those very low temperatures? Well, if it's brine, if it's salty enough, it can be liquid. There are too many assumptions made on a lot of the results of these space programs. I remember when they brought the moon rocks back on Apollo, and the first announcement. Oh, there we are. All right, finally.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness.
I was beginning to think the gremlins were not going to let us have our little interview today. So, Dr. Duke, thank you again for being here on the show. And one of the reasons I wanted to get you here was your recent interview with Alex Jones. And to be honest, my contractual arrangement with GCN, I'm not allowed to say unpleasant things about our fellow GCN hosts. You, of course, can say whatever you want, protected under the First Amendment. So why don't you just sort of back up and tell us about the interview, and then we'll get into the aftermath of what happened.
Well, it's really not my intention to say anything unpleasant about Alex Jones at all. In fact, I appreciated the fact that he had me on. I don't know if he expected me to talk about what I talked about. And I talked about, of course, the same things that you talk about is I think the biggest threat to the world. The Zio-globalists, the Zio-warmongers, the Zio-New World Order, the Zio-wars that we're fighting. The impact of this incredibly, I would call it a Jewish extremist media. The Hollywood establishment, which is poisoning. I think it's a toxic poison of not only the people of the United States of America, but the world. They push drugs upon our young people. They push every sort of degeneracy, destructiveness, destructive behavior. I mean, how many programs on mainstream television and movies produce and promote binge drinking among young people, which causes about 25,000 deaths a year. Young kids believe it's somehow fashionable to have these drinking games and drink so much that it literally kills them. And of the 25,000 that die, you have probably 150,000 have real damage done to their kidneys or their heart, their brain, who suffer strokes and all sorts of other horrible effects. Then you have, of course, a sexual morality that's not certainly productive and good for the family. In fact, there was just recently I think the Ashley Madison site, which promotes adultery. Life's too short to have an affair is their common thing. It's read by a Zionist. It's led right out of Israel. It had some Israeli followers too. But he explained that he and his Jewish wife, they're loyal. and that he didn't want to see, he didn't want to have this for Israel. I mean, the hypocrisy is unbelievable in the world today. And so what I did on the Alex Jones shows, I came in and I just connected the dots, the real dots of who's really behind the New World Order. And of course, just a few years ago, Alex Jones himself said in his own words that the Zionists are the heart and soul of the New World Order. And I know that's true. There's no argument about that, really. They try to argue, a lot of conspiratoriologists, I guess you could say, try to suggest it's some sort of conspiracy between the rich Gentiles and Jews, but it's very clear who the superior position's allotted to. The New World Order, for instance, is actively trying, and I believe this to be true, is actively trying to destroy the European people. And the European people are under an attack today. There is massive immigration to every European country. That's why the Trump campaign is going crazy, because everybody sees this now. I've been talking about this for literally my whole life since I was, a young teen. Since I was 14 years old, I've been talking about and concerned about this massive immigration. And
well, when you say destroy,
some people are talking about it.
When you say destroy the European people, you don't mean literally wipe them out. The way I like to put it is we're seeing an attempt to destroy our sense of a national identity. And sort of blur all the cultural lines so that we don't really have an identity of ourselves, which makes us, of course, easier to manipulate and control and exploit. And there's no question about that as well. And
that's true. I couldn't argue with you one bit that they're trying to destroy our identity. I also would, add a caveat here that the destruction of European peoples, the replacement of the European elite. One of the things they did on the Alex Jones show was show a clipping from the New York Times by their chief columnist, which is David Brooks. And in the David Brooks, it was about an article he wrote called The Chosen, which was about the takeover of the American elite by these Jewish extremists, by these Zionists. And in there, he literally uses those words, that he gave a speech, and afterward this Jewish woman came up to him, and she knew he was a Jew, and he knew she was a Jew, and she said, what you're talking about is the Jewish takeover of America. And he says, well, yeah, there's a lot of truth to that statement. We have transformed the American elite. And so getting, America was a 90% European American country, obviously. And just, in fact, when I was 21 years old, we were 91% of the population.
Okay, Dr. Duke.
It's kind of normal for a country to have an elite representing its people,
I'm sorry to cut you off. I apologize. We got to take a 4-minute break for commercials. We're going to pick up exactly where you left off when we come back from these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Dr. David Duke. And Dr. Duke, before I hand the microphone back to you, I want to make a couple of points here. Having worked in the film industry for a lot of years and not being interested in getting back into the film industry, I can say that, yes, if you're inside the industry, it is dominated and controlled by Jewish interests and Israel's firsters. It's a very powerful, lucrative industry, and so, of course, they're basically going to grab it. And I remember when Dolly Parton came out and said that, if you're not willing to do what Israel wants, you're not going to have a career in Hollywood, and, of course, that was the day her career in Hollywood absolutely ended. But right now, just months ago, if you were out there saying, Israel has too much control over our nation, you'd be dismissed. Oh, you're an anti-Semite, you're a Jew hater, you want Hitler to come back and gas the Jewish babies in the ovens and everything. But today, the American people are forced to confront this spectacle where, Iran and the P5+1 have come to a deal regarding Iran's non-existent nuclear weapons. The rest of the countries want to go for it. Obama wants to sign it. This is a deal that everybody says will keep Iran from getting nuclear weapons. Not that anybody's ever shown they even want to get them in the first place. And yet Israel is dead set. They're going to prove they're in charge of the U.S. government. You had Netanyahu who came over here and did his joint session of Congress speech, thumbing his nose at Obama. And we have AIPAC is in there just handing out checks and threats to get people to go along with this. There was an article in the Jewish media just today, we reported on earlier in the show, the indignation that these Democratic U.S. senators would even think of listening to Obama instead of their masters in Tel Aviv. And for the first time, Americans are having to wake up to the reality that in Washington, D.C., we have a puppet regime, a Vichy government that runs this country for the benefit of a foreign power in Tel Aviv. And it's now unavoidable. And I'm getting all these emails from people who are saying, we thought you were just a complete nut, but it can't be avoided now that our Congress is under the control of Israel. And so people are more willing to look at just what's been going on in our society. And by the way, there are a lot of parallels between this dominance of media and finance and government with what was going on in Germany in the 1920s, 1930s.
Sure. I call it the tri-matrix of power. In fact, a video I did called CNN, Goldman Sachs, and the Zio Matrix has almost 1 million views, and it's got about 30 or 40 copies out there. And it just shows the absolute dominance over our government and how these Jewish extremists in Wall Street, in media, in government, like these cheap, the Washington Post runs articles. I do documentation. I do a lot What I do, my main arguments are based on taking excerpts and quotations directly from the Jewish sources themselves and the mainstream Jewish media. And the Washington Post literally said that 50 to 60% of the contributions for President of the United States come from Jewish sources. The Federal Election Commission showed that the biggest single corporate contributor for both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party were from none other than the biggest predator robber bank in the world, Goldman Sachs, which is a Zionist organization led by Mr. Blankfein and Mr. Cohn, and which has had all sorts of chicanery over the American people's cause.
Look at Mike Huckabee. Look at Mike Huckabee. Yeah. He's over in Israel right now just fundraising, and technically he's not supposed to take any money from a non-citizen, and I'm sure they've got at least one Israeli-American citizen they can funnel it through. But he's got his hand out, the West Bank isn't occupied, it's part of Israel. He's saying whatever he needs to say because he knows where the real money and power in this world is or has been up until now. It's beginning to slip.
And when you think about it, and this is the critical thing, we've talked about this before, here's the Republicans, right, running for President of the United States, Democrats too, though. The first question, and the big question is, man, are you the question is not whether you're loyal to America, it's whether you're loyal to Israel. And, of course, even Donald Trump, and I like a lot of what he's saying, but even Donald Trump says, I'm not on 100%, I'm 1,000%. Well, if he's 1,000% for Israel, if 1,000% interested in Israel, then what percentage is left over for America? And the fact is, when you think about it, to show you the controlled media, even Fox News is a controlled opposition for the conservatives, just as the MSNBC and CNN are controlled opposition for the progressives. But here's what they do, right? They didn't ask them one question like, well, does it make any sense for us to support with American taxpayer money a nation that has committed terrorism against the United States of America, as Israel has done? They admitted it in the Levant affair, where they tried to blow up American installations and cause a war between America and Egypt, an unjust war, which would have cost how many lives, where they literally attacked the USS Liberty, and the evidence is overwhelming that this was a real terrorist attack by Israel. They tried to blame it again on the Egyptians. It didn't work. Thank God it didn't. And, of course, the Jonathan Pollard case, they're now going to release Jonathan Pollard. This guy did more damage, according to our Secretary of the Defense. He said, they said that he did more damage to America than any other spy in our history, and we're going to let this guy out on parole when he should be in there for life. And Israel then took the information, sold it to the Soviets at the time, caused the death of hundreds of American operatives. I mean, with friends like that, we don't need enemies. And yet, these questions never come up. That's because the media is dominated and controlled by them. The Hollywood establishment. There's a good on the Jones Show. I brought out an article from the Los Angeles Times by Mr. Stein, Joel Stein, a Jewish pundit out there, and he. Excuse me, I'm just going to get rid of that. Hopefully, I can try and do that. Joel Stein, and he did a fantastic article. Basically, in fact, he was very upset because Mr. Foxman and others were saying that the Jews don't control, or these Jewish extremists don't control the media. And he came back and he just rattled off all the names of the top studio heads in Hollywood.
I remember that.
He went on to say, he said, I don't care if people think Jews are running Wall Street, the banking institution, the Fed, they're running the media, and they're running the government. All I care is we get to keep running them. I mean, this is amazing stuff, and this is why we're in this condition in this country. Now, I'm going to go back to the European American issue for a second because I think it's a really critical issue. The way they were able to get control over American foreign policy, over our government, and over the discourse of it, the narrative of it, was by basically replacing the American elite. Hollywood was taken over because of what I call Jewish racism, extremism. They're Zionists. Some of them are Zionists, some of them are progressive, but even the progressives tend to be anti-Zionist Zionists. You've talked about that yourself. Gilad Osman's talked about that. I really admire that gentleman. I admire a lot of these gentlemen who have talked about this. If the truth is that, as you know, the Jewish community is absolutely dominated by Zionist organizations. Of the so-called Council of Presidents of major Jewish organizations, that's the 50 largest Jewish organizations in the country. They're all Zionists.
Dr. Duke,
to one degree or another, right?
We've got to take another 4-minute break for commercials.
Okay, it's going fast, isn't it?
Yes, it is. We got a half hour to go. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Dr. David Duke. And Dr. Duke, before I hand the microphone back to you, is something I've noticed that's part of the masquerade for all that's been going on. We are constantly being told we must not discriminate, we must not discriminate, we must not discriminate, and we grow up just totally focused, am I discriminating against these people, to the point where we are oblivious to those times we ourselves are being discriminated against. And
good point. Such a good point.
Yeah.
And by the way, I want to just make it clear to your audience, and I think it's important for me to express this to you because your audience should hear this. There's so many people looking to WhatReallyHappened.com. We're really looking to your work, and you have been a magnificent voice on justice in the Middle East, and truly justice for the American people, because our policy in the Middle East has led to things like ISIS. In fact, ISIS was created. I've been in Syria. I have met the leaders of the Christian community in Syria, and the Muslim Sunni community and Shiite community in Syria. In fact, they're not radical Muslims. They don't believe in Sharia law. In fact, the Muslim leader there believes in secular government. And the truth is that we have consciously gone in and literally supported these jihadists, these insane people like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, literally Al-Qaeda. And the only way you can explain that, of course, is the fact that our government is no longer controlled by the interests of the American people. It's controlled by these Jewish extremist Zionists who supported Al-Qaeda and ISIS, the rise of ISIS, which they did, because they saw Syria as an enemy of enemy to Israel, and supportive of the Palestinians, and supportive of the Lebanese that have been invaded and murdered and massacred by the Israelis, including Christians. That's why we're doing this. And in fact, the whole thing is insane. You think about it. The only forces with boots on the ground fighting ISIS, and the critical issue for ISIS's power, is the Syrian government. And we're still trying to do campaigns and hurt and do sanctions against the Syrian government, which is the only people fighting ISIS. This is only because of our Israeli policy. And I'm looking forward. You're already scheduled, of course, on my show tomorrow. I really want to share a lot of your issues on that tomorrow on my program. I just want to let your audience know you'll be on there tomorrow. I come on at 10 o'clock on the Rinse Radio Network, a competitor, but we're all friends and we're all interested in truth on all these subjects. Now, I want to get back to what you were saying. I agree. The truth is it's not simply a question of destroying the identity of our people. We, European Americans in the academic elite, for instance, like the Ivy League, 70% of the American people are European Americans. 70% of top performing students are European Americans. Every Ivy League university was set up and built from the ground up by European Christian Americans. Today, European Americans are only 20% at Harvard University. Jews who are 2% of the population are now 25% of the university. Now, what I'm trying to get to is the bigger picture. The reason we have these policies and these pro-Zionist policies is because we've been invaded, we've been taken over by a very racist, supremacist group. I mean, that's just ultimately what it is. Zionism itself, I did my doctoral thesis on Zionism as a form of ethnic supremacism. It's exactly what it is. Israel is a racial supremacist state. And thank God not all Jews oppose it. In fact, more Jews oppose it probably in Israel than in America and in Europe, unfortunately. And I appreciate those Jews who do, and there are a lot of Jews who realize this. But they've taken this country over not because they're smarter, but because they're this way. And this issue is not simply about identity. Remember, Golda Meir said in Palestine, she said that there's no such thing as Palestinians. And the Jewish elite in America says there's no such thing as white people. There's no such thing as Europeans. Isn't it ridiculous, right?
Yes.
And we are being ethnically cleansed in the United States and in Canada and in Australia and in Germany and France and Europe, very similar to the way that the Palestinians were ethnically cleansed by massive immigration. They have invoked a divide and conquer strategy. And that's exactly what's going on here. They got all the groups fighting one another, even doing gender politics now with gays against straights. They got feminism, which they've dominated. They've got all of these things, and they themselves talk about this. Now, the ultimate, this is why we have the Zionist power right now in the West. Now, I know you wanted to talk about Alex, or you wanted me to talk about it because you can't, obviously. But Alex Jones talks about all the powerful forces there. the powerful forces are really the Zionist dominator. And even he himself a few years ago said the heart and soul of the New World Order are the Zionists. And he's right. But he can't talk about that anymore, and somebody's got to talk about this. And I believe we're headed, they've controlled communism over the years, which killed tens of millions of people. They're responsible in many ways for the horrific 55 million people died in the Second World War. I believe this was a Zionist-instigated war. They've been instigating the wars ever since then. They control international banking, which robs the whole world. They control the media, which is poisoning our young people. And this is something we got to talk about. Now, Alex, during the show, he really couldn't argue with me. And he got really desperate. He started saying, he even said the next day that somehow during the commercial breaks, I looked like an entirely different person. I guess he was implying that I was some sort of shapeshifter. He said that I was very wolfish in the way that I looked on the commercial breaks. And later he said, "What big eyes you have, Mr. Duke." I mean, it's amazing. I hope your audience, every one of them, you can go to my site and you can find a very good high-definition view of this Alex Jones show, but I hope everybody watches it and just weigh for yourself what my ideas and issues are, and I think people will be very surprised and I think they'll be impressed by the discussion that went on. They won't be very impressed with Alex Jones. In fact, on his own site, overwhelmingly, about 95% of the comments, he had part of the video on there at first, and 95% of his comments and his own subscribers, his own site, were supporting my point of view and condemning him for the way he treated me on the show. This is an amazing interview, and I think it's almost changing the world. It's really waking up a lot of people on the Zionist issue, and I really think there's a tipping point now where people are beginning to learn about the threat of Zionism to all of us, not just in Israel and the Middle East, but really to all of us all over the world in terms of our real freedoms and our values and things that are important to us. So finally, the last section is it's not simply identity. If you look at every country of Europe and America, there's massive immigration. There's extremely low European birth rates. And we're not only going to be a small minority in America, we're going to be a tiny minority in America. And they're just the great and beautiful people. I believe in the right of all people. I want to make it really clear. I don't believe in any sort of supremacism. I don't believe in any sort of racist oppression of anyone. I think that every people have a right to be free and independent. I oppose all of our foreign policies. I also support the empowerment of the communities of every people in this country. I think also that European Americans who built this country, we've got a right to preserve our beautiful Western Christian civilization and culture and people. We are beautiful people like all people on this earth are beautiful, and we have a right to live, and there is a war. A Zio war that's literally trying to destroy European mankind, and I think that would be one of the greatest tragedies, one of the greatest crimes of humanity that's ever existed on the earth. Think about the art and literature and music and architecture and the beauty of the European people. And there's no population explosion in Europe. We're going down. Massive immigration's coming in. And I ultimately think that this control, the Zionist control over Europe, is why the third world is having a lot of problems, obviously, and the Zionist issues, because we Europeans no longer have a policy in the interest of the majority of the American people, but in the interest of a tiny Jewish Zio minority.
All right, well, we're coming up on our final commercial break of the show again. When we come on back, I want to share a couple of observations I got from my first wife, who was Ashkenazi, and a couple of insights about what's going on here, about elitism, exceptionalism, entitlement, and so forth. So we've got to take a 4-minute break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're finishing up with Dr. David Duke. And before I let you grab the microphone again, my first marriage, I was married to a Jewish lady, Broadzilla, and she attempted to indoctrinate me with some of the tenets of her religion. And some of the things she told me, and honestly, I thought she was pulling my leg, that the 10 Commandments only apply to other Jews. Everybody else is fair game because God intended for the chosen people to have all the wealth of the earth to themselves. Now, when you have a population that has been raised in that kind of a belief structure, you're going to see friction. And because of this, we've had 2,000 years of history of expulsions and rejections and driving them out and the rest of it. Same thing happened to the Gypsies, except they were a lot less successful at survival. And that really comes down to it. This idea of treat others as you want them to treat you is a relatively new invention in religious history. And this really is the core, this basic attitude problem of I am chosen, you are there for me to take advantage of, and I'm perfectly comfortable doing that because it's what my imaginary playmate in the sky tells me I should be doing. That's really, when you carry that forward into everything else becomes understandable.
Well, that's right, sir. And I really appreciate the fact that you're bringing that out. And it's a shame, and it's certainly not all Jews do that have this point of view. Obviously,
no, they don't. I know a great many who don't, and they've moved away from that. But but here's the thing. I mean,
Israel is kind of based on this principle. I'll give you an example. Even the Israeli Sephardic leader, Rabbi Aiea Yosef, in his weekly sermon, this is before he died. He gave a big sermon saying that non-Jews only exist to serve Jews. The exact quote, this is from the Jerusalem Post and the Jewish Telegraph Agency, quote, Goyim were born only to service. Without that, they have no place in the world, only to serve the people of Israel. It goes on, quote, why are Gentiles needed? They will work, they will plow, they will reap. We will sit like an effendi, which is a master, and eat, he said to some laughter. Now, this guy was in coalition with Netanyahu. He went on to compare Gentiles with donkeys, saying that we want them to have a long life the same way a Jew wants his donkey to have a long life so he can serve, he can work well and serve the Jew. Now, this guy was not some obscure rabbi out in the middle of the desert of Israel. He was the chief Sephardic rabbi, and he literally was in coalition with Netanyahu. And when he died, he was not condemned because of these incredible racist and horrific remarks. He got the largest funeral in Israel where every major Jewish leader in Israel went to it. It was publicized in the Jewish press. There was not a word about that in the American press, which again shows you how much we're controlled by these extreme racists. Thank goodness there are a number of Jews that are working against this, but we have to understand that the Zionism is not simply a problem of those who are Zionists, because the Zionists dominate the Jewish-controlled community, the synagogues of America and the world. They dominate the Jewish organizations. So if Jews are taught that they've got to promote Jews, as your former wife did, and elevate them over everybody else, that's how they get power. And when they get power, it automatically falls to Zionism. So Jewish tribalism or racism is really the source of the Zionist power, and that's something we have to understand. And thank goodness there are people of Jewish descent who rejected that and really believe in not only the terms of their own heritage, but they want to see the rights of all people to be free and independent as well.
Yeah, there's got to be fair play across the globe, or you're going to have turmoil as a result. And you've probably heard the old joke, the young boy asking his rabbi, why did God make the Goyim? And the rabbi says, somebody has to pay retail.
That's funny. But I love your show, and I listen to it. I've read so many of your articles. You have been a tremendous spokesman, and you're a brave man, and sometimes it's harder for someone with some Jewish heritage to say these things. And I've had many people of Jewish heritage on my show, like Paul Eisen in Great Britain, who's under fire right now with the Labor Party issues about anti-Zionism. I've had Galadas. I've talked to Galadas many times, many other Jewish individuals, and Israel Shahak taught me so much when I read him as even a young man, and I do appreciate those Jews who have stood up very, very strongly. And I appreciate anybody that's standing up for the freedom of all people, and I believe in that, and I believe that every people on this earth's got a right to be free, and it's got a right to exist and persevere the same way the European people do. I just hope that people understand that the attack or the change, the ethnic cleansing, that's exactly what's going on of the United States, Canada, and Europe, is all part of this plan for them to gain control over our countries in a divide and conquer scenario. A good example is the head of public affairs for the largest Jewish organization in America, American Jewish Committee, is a guy named Stephen Steinleit. He said, quote, how long can we continue a policy of divide and conquer and control this country? They even talk like it's a war. They see divide and conquer and dividing people, feminism, all these other issues. What they're trying to do is divide this country so they can dominate, because they are the hardest core ethnic supremacist on the planet. I don't believe in ethnic supremacism. I believe in equal rights for all people and freedom for all people and survival for all people, including my own European people, which I very much love and want to preserve, as I believe that all people on earth have a right to do that.
All right. Well, obviously it's a very complicated issue. I keep going back to the realization that when you have a brand new born baby, they don't know they're supposed to be upset at certain other ethnic groups or certain actions or words. This is all being taught to us. This idea that, we're our own group and we're somehow better than somebody else, and the imaginary playmate in the sky wants us to have all of life's blessings, even at the expense of everybody else. It is an inherently unstable philosophy, just as this private central banking system that the Rothschilds have imposed on the planet for 300 years is unstable. It has to collapse at some point, and we may be looking at that right now. But control...
Well, that's right, but we always have to remember that it's normal for people to love their heritage, want to preserve it, to create a society of traditions of their ancestors, their values, their language, their music, their architecture, the way even they look, the way they behave, the values that they have. That's very normal. That's not supremacism. In fact, every people has a right, obviously, just like the Palestinians do, to preserve their particular freedom and their particular heritage in Israel. They're not afforded that right. Israel is a supremacist state, as you know. They even outlaw marriage between a Jew and a non-Jew, right?
Yes.
But if any European or anybody else tried to make a law that it would be against the law to marry a Jew, that would be condemned as horrible racism. But we have such a controlled media and governments that nobody even talks about that. A Jewish communist leader in Germany, Geisy, recently said, I celebrate the fact that there's not going to be any more Germans, that their birth rate's so low and massive immigration's coming. And he says, I celebrate that, because then there'll be no more Nazis, whatever. Just vicious hatred that's going on. So it's not hatred for people to love their own heritage and want to preserve themselves.
Yeah, Nazis aren't German. Nazis an attitude and a frame of mind, and we're seeing a lot of it in Israel. Have you noticed, we're almost out of time, have you noticed how years ago multiculturalism meant respect for other people's cultures, and today it means putting everybody in this giant blender to just blur them all together? What a change that has been. Yeah, the truth is that
you look at Hollywood like the Weinstein brothers. They put out movies saying, with the black hero saying, kill white people and get paid for it, what's not to like. They're trying to incite African Americans against European Americans. They do it to a degree in Fox against African Americans. The real suppressors of all of us, including the European American people, are the Jewish extremists, the Zionists, really.
Yes.
And I agree with you 100% that we got to be fair to all people, but, I really believe that the European people, look at the birth rates, look at the population patterns, the demographics. The United Nations says it is genocidal to displace a population, to even by whatever, by bringing populations and birth rates. In fact, the communists, who were led by the Jewish extremists back in the 1930s, did this to Ukraine, did this to so many areas of Europe. Mm-hmm. It's happening right now again because they're like they're settling an old score with Europeans. So I am defensive of the European people, but I do believe that if I were president of the United States, I would have a policy that was fair to all people, and I certainly wouldn't support the Zionist state of Israel.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. I'm going to have to cut you off.
I'll be on again tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning, and you'll be on with me, so I want to invite all your listeners to come to my program. Go to my site, davidduke.com, and definitely watch this Alex Jones debate. It's going to be the wildest thing I think a lot of you have ever seen.
All right, got to let you go. We've run out of time. I need to get on out of here. I'm doing Jim Goddard's show up in Vancouver, and we'll be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay skeptical, stay informed, make good choices. Aloha, America.
Aloha.